Good evening. We'll now call this school board work session meeting of October 21st to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Announcements, an executive session report. The public's hereby advised that this meeting is being audio and video recorded for further rebroadcast. Also like to announce that there was an executive session of the board held on October 14th, 2014 for matters of personnel and a discussion of the legal action between John Andrews versus Methacton School District of DCED. By way of attendance, all board members are present this evening. So we'll move on to item number 5, scheduled speakers and presentations. Dr. Zerbe.
Mr. President, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Ms. Judy Landis, principal at Methacton High School, to help us present 10th and 11th grade Achievement Awards, most notably known as our M Awards. Ms. Landis?
Good evening, everybody. If you'll give us just 1 second to set up here. I have about 100 names to read off. It doesn't look like we have everyone in attendance tonight, so that should help things roll along quite well. And then about 140 of the second grade that we'll be doing tonight, so I'll do my best to get through them quickly. We're going to start with the 10th grade awards. That would be to 10th graders from last year, our current 11th graders. And we will start with my glasses. Demil Adafarati, Sirayu Amangandla, Melanie Bateman, Christine Benson, Nicholas Beasley, Griffin Billichek, Anna Billiard, Julie Bishop, Sarah Burry, Jalen Kai, Alexa Casanova, Megan Casey, Alejandra Castaneda, Anna Callie. This is like an exercise in pronunciation tonight. Sorry. Just for the heck of it. Swetha Shangavala, Emily Chung, Joelle Chung, Anthony Sinelli, yes. Evan Cook, Joseph Copa, Juliana Zopp, Allison Davies, Aiden Denicky, Kyle Drummond. Lots of tests, and it's Spirit Week, so.
They're working on next year's.
Danielle Duda, Lauren Earnshaw, Lauren Engelman, Kelly Fagan, Kendra Fang, Theodore Fleck, Liza George, Maria George, Siddharth Gidu. Helps if I actually look at the word. Vikrant Gokhale, Olivia Gomez, Tyler Gray, Kelly Groth, Jessica Guo.
Hold on.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Nayarika Gupta, Tanvi Harakari, Kristen Henry, Elizabeth Herman, John Hillis,
Pause there. And take a picture and then continue.
Little photo op action.
Take their seats.
Okay, thank you very much. Congratulations to these students. We will see you again next year.
Can you ask them to remain?
If you guys could remain just until this class worth is done, and then we can make some shifts, okay? So Shannon Hassan, Sarah Hughes, Patrick Heyer, Elizabeth Juicer, Basil Karen, Radka Kasparkova, Alyssa Kearney, Brendan Kelly, Sean Kenwood, Nancy Contangian, Jeffrey Kirschenbaum,
Congratulations.
Abby Konkley, Serena Kanzler, Megan Laird, John Losh, Sarah Liebold, Austin Lytham, Jeffrey Lee, Jerica Lee, Paulina Lowry, Elaine Ma, Elizabeth McDougall, Kate Markle, Thomas Massiantonio, Devin McGinn, Claire Miller, Kim Wynn, Emily Nice, yay, Zachary Nichols,
Congratulations on that.
Jenna Ninus, Olivia Norton, Sydney O'Donnell,
Congratulations.
Annalise Oliveri, Kevin Oyang,
Okay, after Kevin.
Congratulations.
another quick photo up. Oh, make some space. It's a big club. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. Good job. See you next year. Sojung Peck. Benjamin Parambeth. Sarah Park. Gayatri Pillay. Gilbert Price. Debanik Perkayasta.
Congratulations.
Lasya Rangavaljula. Asma Rathod. Zachary Rhodes. Nikki Rimlinger. Manon Rohilla. Megan Rothgeb. Danielle Saeed. Laura Saleh, sorry. Nicholas Salerno.
Congratulations.
Harry Santhanam. Ramya Saravanan. Sonam Saxena. Nathan Schlenker. Carly Silverstein. Dylan Smeeney. Alana Solomon Dodson. Joseph Stahl. Connor Stevenson. Amanda Tatum.
Congratulations, Joseph.
Tan Tatran. Emma Terry.
Congratulations, Amanda.
Miss Somali Tum. Mihir Upal. Matthew Wiedmeyer. Rachel Wong. Shailene Utuk. Kelly Chang. Ladies and gentlemen, the last of this class. Congratulations, everybody, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.
I'm sorry. It's going to you. Just let me right here for now.
It's really hard when they're behind you. I can't
I know.
when to pause or slow down. Or...
You're doing good. It's going really well. It is. It's going good.
So, yeah, just keep tapping me because I'm not
Yeah.
trying to... And some of these are real humdingers.
I know. Our city is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
It's a nice small group, though. I was terrified a lot of them.
Wood or not? No, they let me do it. And there's going to be even fewer. And there's more of them.
I know. Isn't that funny? You'd think they really would.
Okay, so this is a bigger group of names. But chances are very good it will be smaller up front. Okay, we're going to start with Marina Abraham. Arun Hari Anand. Pooja Anantha. Edward Anelli.
Congratulations.
Bennett Aronow. Varun Baylor.
Wrong one. Congratulations. 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 Congratulations, buddy.
Ajay Beno. Olivia Benjamin. Andrew Bertolacci.
Congratulations.
Sohil Bhatt. Siddharth Bhuyan. Kevin Biju. Victoria Batone. Rachel Bliss. Pooja Baba.
Congratulations. Congratulations to her.
Zachary Bodek. Esha Butala. Emily Copabianco. Joshua Chen.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Zach.
Kristen Cho.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Alexander Choi. Sarah Cipollini. Benjamin Cozzolino. Alexandra Diciani.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Okay, first photo up. Sorry. Sean Dix. Jackson Doer. Michael Duong. Derek Ellis. Kimberlyn Ellis. Anna Gabriel.
Congratulations.
Ariana Galambos. Syarvind Gangnapale.
Congratulations.
Hannah George. Simran Gill. Victoria Gillen. Cecilia Gisladotter. Austin Glass. Haramba Gopi.
Julia, congratulations.
Nora Guda. Dylan Gray. Jamie Greenberg. Kirsten Groff. Sierra Hack. Zainab Hake. Lisa He. Jonathan Heller. Wade Henry. Morgan Herber. Jordan Higley. Ryan Hale. Jessica Hobb. Monica Huber. Mackenzie Jabor.
Sorry, confused us.
Sejana Jayaram.
Judy, hang on a second. Jessica.
Miranda Jen. Lucy Gia. Jonathan Joe. Elizabeth Kapralik. Dylan Katz.
John, congratulations.
Connor Kearns. Garji Ketgar.
Congratulations, Dylan. Congratulations, Dylan.
Angela Kim. Olivia Kimber. Natalia Klochani. Jared Koenig. Sydney Lamarand. One that I can pronounce. Anna Landis. Danielle LaPerche. Isabel Lawler. Julia Leister. Derek Lee.
Congratulations, Izzy.
Leon Lynn. Christopher Luttrell. Kevin Liu. Michelle Liu. Erin Mancini. Michelle Mandrakia. Yes.
Congratulations, Sharon.
Figured you were right on that.
Photo up. Congratulations. Sean Mann. Yep. Sean Mann. Eric Marburger.
Congratulations, Sean. Yep.
Noel Mark. Cameron Marks. Michael May. Elizabeth McCann. Stephen McKay. Jessica McNally. Douglas Meadowcroft. Michael Miller.
Congratulations. Yes.
Ryan Musselman. Trin Wynn. Victoria Nichols. Ryan O'Connor. Hannah O'Neill. Anthony Picaro. Vinay Parakala. Anu Patel. Darshna Patel. Hannah Pellegrino. Arun Padigu. Jessica Pucci. Colin Rafferty. Taylor Rambo. Faraha Rathod. Daniel Realbutio. Casey Reed. Daniel Rize. Emily Ryder. Laura Reimer. Megan Ranella. Marissa Rossi. Nisha Saxena. Catherine Schreiber. Emily Seaman. Nicolette Serator. Neha Shah. Akriti Sharma. Elaine Shao. Alexis Short. Grant Smeeney. Photo up.
Okay. You got it. I was waiting for this look out.
Congratulations.
Where am I?
Samantha Steele. Joanna Stefaniak. Emily Sun. Prachi Taneha. Trent Taylor. Matthew Thompson. Ashley Tillman. Stephen Tipton. Heather Tatanich. Jennifer Tyson. Kunal Vora. Kristen Wang. Monica Rose Webster. Emily Wishart. Kevin Wishart. Catherine Wittenberg. Rachel Wolfman. Derek Wong. Jenny Zhang. Rena Chong. Tian Zhao. Monica Zong. Ava Zino.
You guys should spread out.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the last of the class.
Thank you very much for your help.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience.
Take care of you.
I have to talk to Jess McNally before she leaves.
Yeah. I just want to make one change.
I'm just going to make one change.
The next item on the agenda is first student Charlie Huffman. If you'd mind coming to the podium for us, please.
We'll get you back on time, Bob. We'll be brief.
This item on the agenda is the typical monthly report from first student. Charlie, if you want to give the board an update on the happenings in transportation.
Absolutely. Good evening, Dr. Zerbe, Bob, Stewart, and board members. I'm going to pinch hit for Randy tonight and do my best to deliver it. We'll do the good news, which we always want to remain positive.
It's all good news, right?
All good news. It is all good news tonight. Okay, we have at present 16 new buses in service. We have 9 at Plymouth meeting that will be trooper inspected tomorrow. Expect them to be in service by Thursday, Friday at the latest. The remainder of the buses, which is 484 passenger and 1272s, should be in service by the second week in November. So we'll have our 41 buses out on the road. All good news. Questions?
How are you doing with drivers? Will you have the drivers for those buses?
We're getting back on track. I just had 6 graduate this week from class, so they'll be behind the wheel next week. And we should be very, very close to 100% with standbys. We've had a couple setbacks. We had an untimely death of a driver 2 weeks ago and a couple medical emergencies, but we're staying afloat, and we'll be fine. Be good. Anybody else?
Any other questions for Charlie or for first student? Board? Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you, Dr. Zerbe. Good night.
Next on the agenda, at the request of the Finance Committee, we'd like to ask Zach and Glenn Willard from PFM to represent the bond financing options before the entire board.
Well, by way of a sort of a 20,000-foot executive summary, we were here about a month ago to look at refunding 2 bond issues that would produce savings in the current budget year, or the year that you're currently in, as well as the new budget year. It would save about $200,000. It's probably a little bit more than that today. And it would not extend the final maturity date of any of those bonds. So it's a one-time savings up front. And the plan was that we would come back next week, October 28th, and have final paperwork for you to approve. And that's all still teed up and ready to go if that's what you'd like to do. Then we were also asked to prepare for this evening an alternate option, which produces about $1 million of cash flow savings for the next 10 years. So for the next 10 years, your debt service category would be $1 million less each year. But nothing's for free, and so then you would need to pay back more at the end. And in round numbers, for 10 years you save $1 million, so that's $10 million. And then in the last 3 years, in years 11, 12, and 13, you would pay back $12 million for a net increase of about $2 million. Okay, so that's sort of the executive summary. Why don't I just stop there and see if that made sense. So the first plan is intact, in place. We can go ahead, save one time $250,000, and we can get that started next week. As an alternate option, there would be a much more extensive debt restructuring that produces $1 million of cash flow for the next 10 years, but then requires payback at the end to the tune of $12 million.
So if we went the bigger restructuring, $10 million option, what's the timeline for that? When does that get get papered over, completed, and everything?
Well, I think we were hoping to still be able to, if the board was comfortable authorizing us to proceed this evening, we have spoken with bond counsel and would be in a position to do that as early as next week as well. If you'd like to take more time, that's fine, but we were hoping to keep it moving so we could get the bonds priced before we get too far into the end of the year. So I'll be happy to walk through the handout I brought this evening if you'd like, see more of the details, but that's sort of the 20,000-foot view of it.
I was going to say, Dave, I think it might be helpful if you gave the other members of the board the same benefit of the thought process that you described with us.
Sure. We had very good discussion at the Finance Committee meeting. Both Mr. Whiteleather added some details, but more importantly, I think in the overall purpose of bringing this before you here this evening, or particularly before the Finance Committee this evening and now to the entire board, is we felt that as part of the goals established by the board and as part of our need to be fiscally responsible and provide options for the board for their consideration as we move forward in the budgeting process, we wanted to at least get this on the table for your consideration. It is the perspective of the administration that either of these two options will certainly be helpful for us long term. But it is clear to us in the administration that the overall restructuring piece that's brought before you this evening will have an immediate larger impact on us over these next 10 years, specifically allowing us to address a PSERS issue that we have before us. We certainly have before us some tax reassessments that we would need to deal with, and it allows us to lower our overall yearly expenditures over these next 10 years by $1 million, allowing us to, at the board's discretion, determine where that savings might come from, whether it's specifically attributed to the PSERS offset or to some other matter. But we believe that in these financial times and with the road ahead of us in the very near future, meaning within the next 3 years, hitting this substantial wall with PSERS is something that I want the board to at least consider and consider strongly as we bring this option before you here this evening. If there are any questions related to that, I certainly would be happy to answer them. Or Mr. Whiteleather, do you have anything to add to the discussion?
No, I'm kind of reiterate Dr. Zerbe. As we started looking and as we talked about over the last probably couple of years now, the sustainability of looking long term, there's really not so much of a one-year view anymore of how we budget. We need to essentially look that 5-year plan out as best we can. And one of the opportunities for us is to realize some of the things that are coming down the pipeline. I know that Dr. Zerbe spoke about PSERS, which is a significant issue, probably the most significant issue for our budgets going forward for the next few years until things hopefully stabilize there. But we also need to realize the other cost centers that are becoming very significant cost points for us, special education, charter schools. Some of these areas have really become significant forces within our budget. And while we certainly recognize pushing out under the scenario our debt, we're actually not increasing our annualized cost from a budgetary standpoint. We are in essence proposing to you a reduction of $1 million to our annual budget impact. And then as our debt is trailing off, this debt would be restructured to kind of fill back in those steps. So we would not incur a year-to-year increase by this debt being pushed out. Our debt service would still be reduced by that minimum of $1 million. It essentially is just being elongated out for purposes of achieving the savings. So while, certainly the understanding is that there are certain things that come into play when you start looking at this restructuring. Obviously, the primary purpose of bringing this to you this evening is the ability to do a restructuring and achieve what we believe to be a significant value to the district, provided your consideration for moving ahead with that. And as Dr. Zerbe said, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Stuart, what's the net savings after all said and done, after we restructure all this? I know we save $1 million a year payments, but...
Well, it's $8 million, right?
I mean, so we're going to save about $8 million over the whole length of it.
You save $10 million over that period of time. We're saving $1 million a year over our current debt. So let's just say, for sake of easiness, we're going from $9 million a year to $8 million a year for 10 years. At the end of that 10th year, our debt as it stands right now trails off pretty substantially. The debt under this restructuring kind of fill back in that pretty steep drop-off, so you would actually have an increase in that debt, which would be, when all said and done, the overall cost to us would be incurred about $1.9 million. And that is not in the sense that we would have an overall year-to-year debt increase. It would simply mean that based on our current debt, the way it's structured now and how it trails off, compared to this restructuring and that debt kind of being filled back in the latter years, comparing those two proposals together, the latter part of the years, the debt increases, but not more than the $8 million that we would be under right now. That would never go above that mark under this proposal, incurring no additional debt. And this does include the Emmaus bond for the purposes of the athletic field project.
At the end of the day, it's an $8 million savings. You're saving $1 million a year for 10 years, and then you owe $1.9 million at the end of additional debt.
It's $10 million of savings. It's $12 million of cost overall. So the net impact to us long-term is about $2 million.
Okay.
But as I say, it's a matter of looking at it in the perspective of how their debt is on a year-to-year basis more.
So, right now, what will our total principal amount be? And you're saying that basically 2028, our principal balance is going to be down to zero. And where I'm going with this is, we're looking 12 years out. We're in the process of enrollment study, utilization study. If our enrollment goes up, what kind of expense is that accounting for? That if we have a $10 million hit during that, what's that going to do to us as far as new bonds, or how's that get rolled into getting a $10 million hit, $20 million hit, or a $50 million hit if we have to restructure or rebuild a school, or we are talking 12 years out, stuff's getting older, antiquated. What are our thoughts there?
What you can do under a scenario, and that question did come up during Finance Committee, there's a lot of different scenarios, and I certainly don't want to profess to be the expert. Those folks are sitting and standing here. But you can utilize, as an example, a wraparound structure to incur additional debt. And what that basically means is, as your other debt trails off years out in the future, you can borrow money, let's say today, and incur the substantial part of that cost in the latter years as your other debt trails off. The reason you do that is you don't want to have your debt service, say it's $8 million a year for 10 years, and then it bumps up to $9 million a year. You want to keep it flat or decreasing over time, because once you achieve that savings, you never want to, especially now with Act 1, and you no longer have the exception for debt service to allow you to increase it. And obviously with your other constraints that are already built into your budget, the wraparound structure would work for the purposes of incurring additional debt if need be in a couple of years, and then wrapping around the majority of the principal and interest costs associated with that debt in the latter years when our current debt is trailing off.
Now, the $1 million a year that it's reduced, what are our plans? Is it throw it back in the fund balance, build that up? What are we looking at doing with that budget? I mean, I don't believe in reducing it and then just using that. There has to be something that we're doing with this money, or planning-wise.
That's a good question, Jim. We haven't predetermined what that offset will be. We're going to have that discussion in addition to other discussions with the Finance Committee in order to determine how to best produce a budget that's favorable for the board's consideration, likely closer to the June timeframe. But as we move forward with this, we're hoping to provide additional items for the board's consideration as part of the goal-setting mechanisms that you guys have put before us. We want to provide the options so that we can make good decisions together. But we think this is one good decision that we're recommending as part of that overall strategy to bring a solid budget to the board.
One last question is, if we were to put that $1 million aside or even increase to $1.5 million over a 10-year period and we ended up with between $10 and $15 million, at what point would that equal the balance of the principal where we could do a lump sum payoff on that? So where's X and Y on a payoff if we just put the money aside to prepay it a little early?
The principal amount of debt that you have outstanding right now is $87 million, so it would take a little while till we got.
I understand.
Yeah. I don't know without working on it. Be happy to figure it out for you.
So Finance Committee discussed this tonight. Sorry, I missed it. Was there a perspective from the Finance Committee or an opinion?
I have an opinion that it's for a short-term gain for us, $1 million a year, but we are actually, it seems to me, agreeing to spend almost $2 million more in order to get that short-term gain. And I have concerns about that.
Yeah, I mean, Christian, at the discussion of the Finance Committee, that was the topic that we wanted to share with the other board members, was that that's the key issue here. Do we want to have the flexibility of that $1 million, given the other challenges that we have, but there's a cost that comes to, you got to pay for that.
Can I just ask, let me just summarize this from a non-financial sort of mind to make sure I have this correct. We had the short-term $250,000 gain. That's an option. This is option number 2, and this is with the $1 million savings paying the $2 million over the long haul. So the administration comes to the Finance Committee with a recommendation for option number 2. Okay, and based on what? Your rationale is what?
The rationale is that we wanted to provide options to the board, and specifically to the Finance Committee, as we work toward providing options related to the goals that were established by the board.
Okay, let me try it again. This is the recommendation, option B. And why is this better than option 1?
Because it reduces our overall yearly budgeted expense by $1 million for each of the next 10 years.
So it's better to have disposable cash on an annual basis that we can put toward our bills, perhaps, as opposed to...
That is correct.
Yeah.
So we could take this $1 million and pay for example, pay $1 million towards our PSERS expense, rather than, for example, raising taxes by $1 million in order to pay for the PSERS expense.
If I could just add, I think I'm close to where Brenda is on this. We're, from my perspective, borrowing money over the next 10 years, which has to then be repaid in the 3 years after that, burdening the district in years 11, 12, and 13 with $12 million of debt that isn't there now, in order to meet some financial pressure that we see on the horizon over the next few years. I know Brenda mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting that the likelihood of the need to borrow additional money during this period is pretty high. If you look at 5, 6, 7, 8 years out, there's going to be a need for capital. So the 1 million will, in terms of its availability, probably be reduced in terms of that over the period due to the need for more capital. And I'm not entirely comfortable yet, and I'm open to other thoughts on it, of burdening the district with that kind of debt load in years 11, 12, and 13. We do have significant financial problems going forward, as we know, with PSERS and charter and special ed. I'm not entirely comfortable putting some of that burden out into years 11, 12, and 13 on that. That's just my initial reaction to this.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like kicking the can down the road, just a little bit. So I have a question to piggyback off what both of them said. So we have option A, we have option B. What's option C? I mean, can you do option A, and then if we want to revisit B, do that later, or does option A negate B?
Well, that's a good question. In this evening's handout, if you go to page number 3, we're refunding, option A is refunding columns 3 and 4 on this page. And those, we're only going to refund parts of those other yellow columns. So option B is made convenient by the fact that we have to go in and do something to columns 3 and 4 anyway, if that made any sense. So there is an option, there would be option C, we can do anything you'd like, but it's always going to have some cost to extend the debt. So I mean, column 3 and 4 are true interest rate savings. I'm making the rate up, but we're going from 3% to 2%, something like that.
So that's why there's
smaller
savings, no consequences down the road.
And then I think the Finance Committee, someone asked, the next refunding opportunity would be at the bottom of column 21, November of 2016 would be the next, probably, somewhere around that time frame would be the next meaningful refunding opportunity from an interest rate point of view.
So to Peter's point, if we went with option B, and maybe it's not to his point, but made me think of this. If we went with option B, and after the Emmaus bonds were done and we needed additional capital, does option B preclude us from doing any other borrowing? Does it affect our credit rating or the financial structure of the district in a way that would stop us from doing other borrowing?
Well, every bond issue is going to require a credit rating and sort of a snapshot of how things look at that time. So it would just depend on the overall condition of the district and the community and everything else. On page 5, this would be a snapshot of your debt, assuming you did option B. And I think the question is, if you added new money onto this graph at the bottom of the page, that gives you an idea of what it might look like. I mean, depending on whether you borrowed that money 5 years from now or 8 years from now or something like that, 2027, 2028 is when the drop-off occurs. I think Stu mentioned the board might choose to do that as a wraparound option at that time. If you're 5 years into this chart, you'd have about 10 years or so until you got to the drop-off. So you would have a wraparound option available to you, I think, to answer your question.
So you still would have the ability to borrow new money in the future. I mean, the one thing when we look at your debt comparatively to other school districts, your debt is relatively short. According to page 5, if we went through with this plan, it would all be gone by 2028, so that's about 14 years from now. So if you were to go out in the future for, to renovate a school or whatever the project would be, a lot of times school districts around the state would tie, the length of that bond issue to the useful life of the project. So it's very typical to see 20, 25, and 30-year bond issues associated with kind of renovation projects and new money projects that might come down in the future. And, given your short debt at the moment, going out to 2028, this would not, by doing this restructuring or by doing option A, the refinancing, would not impact your ability to go out in the future and borrow additional money.
Stuart, does this restructuring provide relief debt-wise overall for us in the sense that if in the near future we need to borrow again, it does provide a ceiling for us to make to meet a budgetary budget. I mean, we could theoretically, if we had borrowed, we could put $1 million back into the budget and be in a realm that we currently exist in. Does that not make?
It'd probably be more advantageous to utilize as the other debt trails off, if we would need to incur additional debt to wrap it around. And if I can, just as a side comment, I certainly, value the opinions and discussions tonight as we look at this, because it is an important decision for this organization, both short and long term. I guess the concerns that we share administratively and share with you as a board and the community is, as we look at the implications of Act 1 on our budget, the index is going down. We were at 2.1% for this year, the current year. Next year it's at 1.9%. So that limits our ability to increase our taxes to offset our cost. And, as we get into more of the meat of the Finance Committee discussions and what costs are mandatory for organization, what costs are discretionary, you'll gain a much better perspective of how lopsided mandatory costs are for our organization versus discretionary costs. And as we look at the future, and certainly we can talk about PSERS for hours and we can all get angry about it, but the simple fact is that is by far going to be the biggest issue for Methacton and frankly every school district across the state. It's not simply our issue, it's a state issue. And what we're looking to do as we evaluate all of these particular items within our budget is to bring to the table an opportunity for us to, one, address a $2 million issue alone. Next year's budget is what PSERS is going to cost us. I mean, based upon our salaries, which PSERS is directly generated from, our overall cost is going to incur a $2 million increase. I mean, this simply addresses that one line item. If we kind of put this in perspective, it won't address special education, it won't address charter schools, it won't address contractual obligations we have, health care, all the other things that we and the other 499 school districts deal with. So, just as part of the discussion, as we look at this, and certainly there is cost associated with doing this type of restructuring, I think it's also equally important for us to look at how we need to recognize how to work within the confines of what Act 1 does for us. And I think that's an important part of the discussion, because while we certainly want to look at all the avenues for us, revenue-wise as well as expenditure side, there really is a controlling factor that's really outside of the realm of our school district's control. And for us to be able to look at other avenues and other parts of our budget and our operation, that we're able to come back to you with suggestions and ideas for us to allow us to work, I guess, better within the confines of what we have. Because it's much more difficult to deal with an increased cost than it is to reduce your cost, because it's simply going to be offset. If we reduce $1 million of expenditures within debt, unfortunately, the offset is going to be PSERS, or the offset is going to be special education, or it's going to be some other cost we simply don't have control over. And it allows us, again, to look at how we operate as an organization looking long-term. I mean, we're going to be having some very in-depth and perhaps difficult discussions as we lead into developing our 15-16 budget. And I think while we have a lot of things yet to uncover, I just think for purposes of discussion tonight, I think that I'm hoping I'm just providing some helpful value to you as you kind of synthesize all this information, because it is a lot. And if you take the position of moving forward on this type of restructuring, it is an important decision for the organization to make. But I certainly want you to understand what thoughts went into it from an administrative standpoint to bring this to you, and the value we believe this will help us relative to taxes and operational issues and other constraints that we have and will continue to have. And with that, I'll certainly shut up, but I just wanted to share that with you.
No, we appreciate that, and we appreciate the administration. I think you guys are doing exactly what we said, is looking for opportunities to reduce costs or other creative ways to stop us from having to raise taxes. I think what you see the board wrestling with is, the idea of borrowing more money, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, whether it's 12 million or whatever the number is. It's just adding some additional debt to our portfolio, and I think that we're struggling with whether strategically that's the direction we want to go in, I think.
I would just add, on top of that, is if we were, I guess if maybe I was comfortable, maybe others feel the same way, that we were, had gone and looked at all the areas maybe that we considered in our goals and objectives, things around those topics, and we were comfortable that we squeeze those as far as we could, then this might be a discussion that we must have, but I don't know that we've gotten to that point in time yet.
And I don't think we have to decide this tonight, right? To your point, I mean, this came before the Finance Committee tonight, and I think you folks wanted to bring it in front of us, to kind of expedite our talking about it, but certainly wouldn't. I don't think anyone would begrudge the board thinking about this and sending the administration back with some homework before we make a decision like this.
Glenn, is there any issue on the timeline for columns 3 and 4 and us utilizing those columns 3 and 4 if at a later date we wanted to do something similar to this option B, 3 months from now, 4 months from now?
Without running the numbers, I don't know, but my inclination is it will be more expensive if we do option A, now, and then come back and decide to do option B in a month or 6 months. My inclination is that B will be a little bit more expensive. It makes sense to do it now while we have the bonds involved with the A transaction. So the math I don't think would work as good, but we would need to go run those numbers.
What's and I know this is a swag, right? But what's a little bit more expensive?
2, 3, 500,000, something like that.
So we could still get the $1 million a year, but the 1.9 cost would go from 1.9 to.
So you can still get $1 million over the next 10
yes,
years.
we can still get to the $1 million,
or 14.
but it's just what happens at the end was where it would get a little bit more expensive. That's my inclination.
Yeah.
We would need to go run that, though.
Can we? Is the board comfortable if we go run that? Because again, I don't think you were necessarily looking for a decision tonight on this, since it's in front of the board for the first time. So maybe that's something that we could go run and take a look at. And I don't know how quickly we can communicate that to make a decision on A versus B. But.
Well, can I just ask one other question before we move on that request? Is there any timeline for us to deal with option A in and of itself? So for example, is there a window where we need to deal with option A before the option is no longer available to us?
Well, option A, refunding those bonds, what we have in here is like the earliest timeline. If you'd like to take more time to decide that's fine. You're certainly within your rights to do that. We do have the opportunity to make the bonds bank qualified in 2014, which means you would issue 10 million or less. So at some point we slip into 2015 and you didn't get your full allocation for the 2014 calendar year, you'd have 10 million for calendar year 15, but I think the Emmaus is, if that would happen, would be 5.5 million of it. So then you would just be issuing in 2015 non-bank qualified. That's not the end of the world. The rates are a little bit higher for non-bank qualified bonds. We were trying to do the way we presented it last time and the way we presented the B option tonight gets you bank qualified in both years. So we're kind of at an awkward point in the calendar where we're trying to get something settled in 14 and leave something to settle in 15. So we don't need to do that by October 28th, but within a couple of weeks, we should try to do that if you want to get something done this calendar year.
So to that point, how quickly could you guys run some numbers on, call it option C, right? Doing A and then doing B.
We could have something for next week for you.
Is there a possibility for an option, though, that incorporates where we have the $1 million of savings for the 10 years, where that is some number less than that, such that the overall cost is zero?
Sure. Absolutely. There's like an infinite number in between here. We can, pick the number. We could solve for make it $700,000 a year. We could solve for make that cost at the bottom be $1 million. We could solve it a number of different ways.
I think the ask is as much as possible less each year and nothing on the back end. So if you can make that happen, then we'll go right on that.
There's a lot of people trying to solve for that one.
Anyone else have, Jim?
Well, I mean, just in round numbers, I guess if you made it $500,000 a year, at the back end, it's going to be $1 million, right? I mean,
Can I ask a
My only fear here is we are pushing the can down the road or kicking it down the road, however you want to say it. We have our enrollment study, utilization study, or is it that part of the puzzle that we don't know how that's going to affect our budget? By refinancing money to offset PSERs rather than maybe negotiating a good contract, does it take the weight off the board of administration to look harder at the contract, work harder? Also, if we are short and we can't make Act 1, at some point Harrisburg has to hear us because, hey, we can't do our budget because you guys haven't fixed PSERs. I just want to get a better picture, and I just have a problem with just pushing it down the road a little bit more, and that's where I'm at.
Well, I don't think that we're going to lighten up on the administration around looking for reduced costs, and I think we're still all committed to the best contract that we can, or contracts that we can. I think this is just another piece of that puzzle. But to your point,
well,
just do the right thing on this.
With the buildings and such, I'm looking 10 years out when there's roofs that have to be done, structural stuff, complete fit outs of a building. I'd like to know what's coming down that road, because if you go back in history, when we did our enrollment study for Skyview Arcola, that enrollment was actually dropping. They were telling us that was increasing, and we ended up going in all that debt where we would have been debt-free by now. And look at our enrollment trends, and I'm sure when we do this study, we'll find out that the projections back then, when we justified that project, we spent a lot of money for what we're getting square footage-wise.
Wasn't here for that.
Can I go back to, somebody brought up a Plan C. Stuart, is there a way to look at this principle and see if we can just refinance instead of purchasing bonds for this? So that we can just, I don't know what our interest rate is for that. I mean, can we look at something to that effect?
well, that's what gets you the $200,000. That's kind of option A.
It's just refinancing.
Is refinancing those two transactions. They have interest rate savings, and we're up to the call date. So,
Okay.
But do you mean refinancing everything?
Well, I don't think we can, right?
No.
Because these have different dates. but
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Marie, anything you want to say? Or?
I guess I'm with Brenda too. I almost think I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, just extending debt out. And if we can get the 1.9 to be 0, that would be good. But it just seems like we're saving $1 million, but it's costing us, or $10 million, it's costing us $2 million. I don't feel comfortable with it.
Anyone else? Okay, so don't think we're ready to vote on anything tonight. So how about this? Would the board be open to bond council going back, taking a look at everything, coming back with some additional options they can work with Stuart and the administration on structuring some other options for us, be it less savings each year with less payment at the end of 10 years, be it go with option A and look at option B, a little bit in the future for us to think about things, or maybe it's a completely different option, and then maybe the finance committee can meet in the interim if need be to beat up some of the scenarios that come back. Does that work for everyone?
That's fine.
Get something?
Yeah, I just, I think it was a meeting or two ago, we talked about, and then it was repeated in the press, and I think Mr. Andrews makes these statements from time to time that in 3 years, we're looking at being $12 million in the hole. And though the pain of considering, borrowing money and having the expense to kick the can down the road, and I clearly get it, and I understand it, and I'm not in favor of it either. However, I think we have before some significant hurdles, and we just felt that this was a good opportunity to meet some of that $12 million need. So we will go back and we will work with with PFM to get some additional options, C's, maybe D's, and come back. I guess the question is, in timing, I just don't want the board or us to miss an opportunity to take advantage of something. So I need to know, time-wise, when you say we have a couple weeks, I don't know what that means. Is that 2 weeks? Do we have a deadline to take advantage of option A, if the board so chooses to, and get the best bang for its buck under option A? And when does the window close for us to combine option A in order to get option B if we so want it? I'm not getting any clarity on that.
Well, once you do option A, it probably makes option B more expensive. Okay, because you can't use those same bonds.
Right.
Okay. In terms of, an exact date, your November meeting date, whatever that November 11th, I think, or something like that, that would be a good target if you want to get something done in calendar year 2014.
Okay, that's what I needed to understand. All right.
So let me just say, I don't think we're saying no to anything tonight. Like I said, we appreciate you bringing it in front of us. I think the board just needs more information before we can make a decision. We're together again in a week. We can get the finance committee together again. The reality is, if we needed to, we would bring the whole board together for a special meeting if we felt like that there was an opportunity to do something that would make something happen in 2014 that was compelling. So.
No, great point. I just wanted to make sure we did not lose an opportunity. So, for example, if we needed to do it under a certain timeline, I think it would be important for the board to know exactly what that timeline is. So, it sounds like the timeline is 2014, but it certainly can't be December 31st of 2014. Right. It needs to be some timeline where you can take the necessary steps that you need to do. So, we'll currently work through options and prepare to bring something back for discussion on the November 11th meeting. Is that
no, I think next week, right?
Yeah, I think we would need to be back next week. If we're comfortable with something, then we could...
We could potentially act on November 11th, but you're going to come back next Tuesday.
Just another minute or so. So on page 5, just to help us figure out what this option should look like, again, there's so many of them that are conceivable. So on page 5, the blue column, that shows you the savings. So that was the option B of this evening. The $1 million or so a year, pay $12 million more at the end. Just throughout, we could save you $500,000 each of those years, and then it's going to be $1 million at the end. But there's no option where it's zero at the end. So that's what I'm saying. Either we can we can tell the computer to solve for, don't make it $1 million, make it $400,000, make it $700,000, whatever, or we can tell the computer just what number are you comfortable paying more at the end. But some guidance would be helpful.
That's a good question for the board. Is there a target number that folks would be comfortable with that we could give some direction on now, having thought about it for 15 minutes we've discussed this?
It seems to me that the sticking point is that $1.9 million cost at the end. If you're just wrapping around the debt at the end doesn't necessarily bother me as much as increasing the cost of the debt or total debt. And that's what I think I'm hearing a lot of around here. I understand the idea of freeing up cash flow for the district, because who knows what's going to happen in 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And if you can chop $1 million off your debt service every year, that's a pretty good bit of coin. What it does is it will level out your debt payments all the way through 2027 to about that $8 to $9 million range. Okay. And And that's what you have to understand, is that that's what you're doing, because otherwise you would, you're just basically pushing back the debt. But again, I think the problem is incurring another $2 million in cost at the end of it.
What I can do for next week is run, so this is the $1 million a year option that costs 1.9. I can do one where we save $750,000 a year, and that cost will be something less, 1.2 million. Then I can run a $500,000 a year one, and that'll be 700. I'm making up the numbers, $750,000 cost instead of 1.9. Would that give everybody a better feel for?
Yeah, I think that would be good for us to see exactly, rather than just saying it's probably going to be, if you cut it in half, it's probably going to be half.
So we'll do that. We'll step from $1 million to 750 to 500.
And then, yeah, go ahead.
Earlier when we talked about the $5.5 million that we had already authorized previously, and you indicated, I believe, if I recall correctly, that that was included in our total numbers. But now when you were talking, it seemed to me that you were saying something about the $5.5 million affecting our $10 million cap per year, and that the $5.5 million will be next year?
Okay, so the $5.5 million counts towards calendar year limits in whichever year it settles, so I'm assuming it settles next year, okay? But the annual payments on it, we have included those in here.
Okay. Thank you.
As I'm just running this through my head, if our budget's $100 million a year, this is saving us $1 million a year. It's not like we're going to not spend $100 million. We're still going to spend a 99, and even though we got that $1 million savings, we're going to still spend that $1 million, so it's still going to end up being a $100 million budget, even though we're saving $1 million. So all those expenses at the end, we end up paying basically 2% for those expenses. I mean, it just hits us later. We're still paying all the same expense. We're not taking care of the cost. Right, and
It's going to pay for it sooner or later.
But we're not knocking down our principal any quicker. We're spending more money.
And I think that
it's just hidden. It's just hidden for 10 years.
What the board is going to have to wrestle with is what it's willing to pay for this cash flow savings. Is it willing to pay $500,000, $750,000, $1 million? Just like you said. That's what you're going to have to figure out. You can't do any of this restructuring without a cost.
Can you give us in your documents what the present value of those savings and costs will be? So it's not just looking at these gross numbers?
Okay.
Well, it's really not a savings, because at one point we had to pay the $10 million back plus another 1.9.
It's cash flow relief. Right?
I understand that, but it's still.
Yeah. It's not. It's not. You're not reducing expenses. You're saving cash flow in a short term. It's debt. It's debt. You're borrowing money.
The other variation of this, and maybe we can just show this, is instead of saving $1 million a year, I'm making this up, you save $1 million for the next 2 years, and you add it on at the end. But so in year 3, you're going to go back. It'll look like $1 million tax increase when you're sitting here. I mean, you're just going back to the old run rate, but you'd save you $2 million in the next 2 years.
Stuart, did you say the PSERS increases are really going to hit in the next 2 years? Or what is that counter? I can remember like 3 years in my head, but I don't know how far.
Yeah, the next couple of years are going to be some of the bigger spikes for us. Next year's projected increase is going to be a little over $2 million. That would be for 15-16. 16-17 is somewhere in that ballpark. Don't take me verbatim, but I believe it's right around $1.7, $1.8 million. It trails off somewhat, but trails off comparatively to $2 million. It trails off to about $700,000, $800,000 in 17, 18, and 18, 19, and then it creates somewhat of a plateau at that point. But we're over 30%, which is 30% of our payroll is what we would contribute as the employer to PSERS. Which is obviously the number based upon what we're looking at to 5 years out is a pretty shocking increase overall.
Okay, so unless anyone else has any comments, you guys will go back, run some additional scenarios. We'll talk about it next week. Hopefully, we'll get to a point where we give you some direction on whether it's A, B, or player to be determined later.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Next on the agenda, we have item 5.3, enrollment and capacity study. Mr. Thompson?
Good evening. Just to remind you of where we started, last spring we started in preliminary conversation with the administration about the need to evaluate a number of facility factors in an effort to find some potential cost savings through more efficient use of the existing facilities. Ultimately, the district selected the Pennsylvania Economy League, Central Pennsylvania Division, to conduct the study. I am Jim Thompson, and I'm actually with Thompson Associates, and we're the consulting assessor working with Pennsylvania Economy League. The Pennsylvania Economy League will be leading for their part on this study the demographic analysis and enrollment projection portion of the study. So as the conversation's been flowing here this evening is to look down the road over the next 5 years and over the next 10 years as to their best estimate on the enrollment projection by grade level. In addition, the Pennsylvania Economy League has already initiated their study. They've been collecting pupil accounting data, including the grade level progressions from your student accounting folks here in the district. Also, they've been collecting birth data from Montgomery County. In addition, the Economy League met with township officials from both townships to assess potential current and future residential development. Just within the last couple of weeks, the school district reported their annual fall enrollment numbers to the Department of Education, and that was really the last piece of the puzzle that Pennsylvania Economy League needed to complete their demographic analysis and enrollment projection. And I'm here to report this evening that that demographic analysis and enrollment projection will be complete approximately mid-November. And that time we'll be ready to present those numbers. For my part on the study, Thompson Associates leads the educational assessment, and a big part of that is the student capacity analysis school by school in the district. And part of doing that, I've completed a first walkthrough. When I say we, I mean me, is I do this myself. So I've walked through each of your 8 schools and met with all 8 principals to understand the use of each school for educational programming so that we can rate the student capacity for each of the schools and then mesh together how does the projected enrollment fit together with the capacity of the schools. In addition, you've asked me to collect facility data for a facility condition assessment, and that information is currently coming to me from the facilities department in the form of recent studies that have been conducted, and I will be returning to the schools in a second walkthrough in the next couple of weeks to verify what I saw the first time around, because when I walked through the facilities the first time around, I was looking more for the educational program issues than I was for the facility condition issues. But irrespective, we'll be completing the educational assessments, including the the capacity analysis and a facility condition assessment, also in a mid-November time frame, prepared to make that presentation. I would call this a foundation of knowledge, as you already know, the decision-making in the school district needs to be built on that foundation of knowledge. So it's not very much help to the school district to make decisions if you're not doing them as informed decisions. And based on the results of the enrollment projection, capacity analysis, and condition assessments, we'll be looking at a range of cost-saving options, including, for example, we've been asked to look at the feasibility of are the buildings configured so that you could convert half-day to full-day kindergarten? Are the rooms there? Do they have the proper toileting facilities, and so on? Also, to look at the feasibility of consolidation, and we've already heard this evening is, don't you have some facilities that you could sell or consolidate? And that will be an important part of our deliberations once we get both the capacity analysis and the enrollment projection. Any questions?
No questions?
I think the finance guys took the steam out of the board.
Yeah, tough act to follow, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Thanks very
your
much.
information this evening. Next on the agenda for scheduled speakers, PSSA Achievement Report, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, Ms. Katona. Yep, please move the seats in the front.
It's already.
So here, I guess.
Okay, this evening I'm going to present for you some slides, some different graphs and charts that demonstrate the PSSA achievement from 2013-14. This is probably a little bit different than what you are accustomed to seeing at this time because the data that we have from the state at this point this year is a little different than what we're accustomed to having. So the objectives for this evening's presentation, I would like to share with you sort of a review in terms of the current state of testing in Pennsylvania and present the overview of 2014 achievement scores from grades 3 through 8, which will include math, reading, science, and writing. The focus, as you'll see, will be primarily on math and reading, but you will see scores from science and writing as well. As I go through, I've put together some comparisons between Methacton School District and Pennsylvania. I have some information regarding the past 3 years of longitudinal data, specifically in reading and math. Then I also am providing some information on each of the grade levels 3 through 8 from the past 5 years, as well as the grade spans of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, as those were written into the board's goals. At the end, I would also like to identify for you some changes that have occurred over time regarding state testing, and some of the changes that have occurred in our own district's area of curriculum, and then give you some insight to actions moving forward in our district. The items that I will not be addressing this evening are the School Performance Profile, or SPP, for 2014. Originally, the state was scheduled to release the SPP for public view on September 24th. They were not, however, able to meet that deadline, as they have been recalculating the PVOS, or the Value Added System data, for Keystones. And just today, we learned that they're still continuing to do that. I will not be addressing the high school achievement scores. Because of changes in the state testing over the past 5 years, we don't really have achievement data at this point to share out that would show any type of progression, because we have in the past 5 years, 3 years of PSSA data, and then last year's achievement data from the Keystones, but we don't have this year's solidified yet. And then I also will not be addressing here tonight the PVOS or the growth data. Again, this is something that was supposed to be released to the public within the last 2 weeks, but at this point, PDE has decided to release it along with the school performance profile data when that is available. Just as a reminder, the growth data is going to be a point that we'll be looking at in the school performance profiles when they come out.
Do we know what's causing the delay?
It's the recalculation from the Keystones. Apparently, there were some pieces that they had been questioned about with regard to the value-added data from some of the schools from the Keystones, and so the state has been going back in and recalculating to ensure that what they put out in that school performance profile based on that growth data is accurate. And so it's taking longer than they had thought it would.
So I don't know, maybe I missed it. Do they have a target date when that's going to be released?
September 24th.
Well, assuming that
Assuming. I was doing a little collaborating with some of our neighbor districts, and everybody is thinking that hopefully by sometime mid-November we will have that. That seems to be where everybody's mind is right now. So could very well be. So in Pennsylvania right now, staying away from the rest of that school performance profile information, last year you probably heard about the flexibility waiver, which no longer mandates that we meet the adequate yearly progress target. If you recall, that target had been set for all students to reach 100% proficiency by 2014. And so the majority of states across the nation went for waivers from that obligation, and Pennsylvania was one of them. So we right now have the PSSA, which applies to grades 3 through 8 in these areas, math, reading, science, and writing. As part of the changeover from the No Child Left Behind with the flexibility waiver, we are going to be seeing some changes, which I'll review later with our testing. But for now, just if you note that beginning in this spring, instead of a separate reading test for all students in grades 3 through 8, and then a writing test for grades 5 and 8 only, this spring we are going to have an English Language Arts, or ELA, test, which will include reading and writing, and all students in grades 3 through 8 will be taking that test. So, a few of our comparisons of achievement. I'm going to start with the district overall, grades 3 through 8, with the state. These are numbers that I have, we receive this information directly from the state, so I've put up here from 2013 and 2014. Methacton School District, again, this is all grade levels 3 through 8 in each of the subject areas. You can see that consistently we have scored above the state. And in some cases, when you look at the comparison between 2013 and 2014, we have imitated the state's trend in terms of increasing or decreasing. You can see, for example, that this year our reading scores overall saw an increase from 86.7 to 88% proficient and advanced. And again, when I use proficient, I'm talking about proficient and advanced students. You see that the most dramatic drop this year was in writing, which is administered to 2 grade levels, 5 and 8. I looked at 2012 earlier today and noticed that in 2012 in writing we were at about 81 point something, so we kind of had a spike last year and then, or 2 years ago, and then a little bit of a drop last year. And then we see that the slight drop in math was also mirrored in a slight drop by scores across the state in that area. And in terms of science, again, 2 grade levels, we saw a little bit of a decrease there in 2014 in comparison to 2013.
What do you think drives the drops?
I actually, when I get to the end, I'll have some ideas on some reasons why we see, again, and it's difficult to say when you have a drop that, you know, it's like it's a point or it's 2 points or it's 0.5, and, you know, it does get a little frustrating sometimes to think about why is that. The easiest answer I can give you right off the top of my head would be we definitely began to see some of the changes in the test in 2014, and that could be a real possible reason behind it.
Right, but to your point, mathematics, I mean, it's less than a point drop, right? And that tracks with the state, but writing, I mean, 4 points almost, that's a significant drop, particularly when the state didn't drop that much.
You know, and as I will get into a little bit later, you know, I think you have to consider too, traditionally, the math and reading have really, over the last 12 years, have really been driving, not just here, all across the state, have really been driving the teaching and the focus and so forth. And, you know, possibly we weren't giving as much attention to writing. That could be a very real possibility. But again, as I said, this is going to change again this year because now everybody's going to be thinking about reading and writing together. But we won't be able to compare it because it'll be a different test. So this is the longitudinal data for math. And if you look here, first of all, note that you are looking at different sets of students for each year. And if you start at 2012 and then work your way up to 2013 and 2014, you would then see, so here once again, we saw, again, different groups of students going through. We saw in 2012 we were at about 94.8, then we dropped in 2013 and we dropped again in 2014 in grade 3. If you want to get a sense of a cohort, if you look at, I'm not having success with this. If you look at, for example, grade 3, 2012, and then move to grade 4, 2013, again, you see a slight drop there, and then grade 5, 2014, you see more of a drop once again, although in 5th grade, over those 3 years, you see things were relatively stable. Again, in and I have this later on, but just to try to address some of the questions that might be going through your head at this point. One of the things also that has happened over the last few years, in 2010, 11, and 12, we had a test called the PSSA-M that was a modified version of the PSSA. And certain special education students, those who qualified, were able to take that exam instead of the regular PSSA. It tested them on the same standards. It had very similar questions, maybe just fewer of them, had, larger print, things along those lines. We didn't have a lot of students necessarily that took those exams, but the ones that did tended to do very well in them. When Pennsylvania got the flexibility waiver, one of the things that we had to do was to give up the PSSA-M. And so those students who had been faring pretty well on the PSSA-M were now going back to taking the PSSA. And it is possible that within some of these numbers, we may be seeing some of the realities of that. Yes, Kim?
Hey, Mary, I'm looking at eighth grade, 2012, 13, and 14. At what point did we start to, I guess, introduce the different strains into the eighth grade where your regular math or algebra 1, whatever? I mean, was that 12? Or?
Offhand, Kim, I'm really not sure, but I can certainly look at that for you.
Well, I guess I was trying to make some correlation between, some of the eighth graders, Dane would have been up.
Sure.
Correct, with an algebra curriculum. All right.
Well, I've seen a huge drop from 6th grade to 8th grade is huge.
Okay, I'm sorry.
How our everyday math is in here, now that you're having a home pilot, have you looked to see
Okay.
the kids that are in where they placed compared to the other kids?
We have a lot of data to go through. Yeah. I mean, I don't have that in here, but I'm saying that's part of the process that we are going through is to look at who our students are and how they've been faring.
I have one more question, and I don't know if you're going to cover it later. I know a thing that's been brought up by parents for quite a while is, can we track these kids from the time they start taking them all the way through the end of high school to see where they are, and like either by school, by child really, by grade, to see where they end up at the end? So whatever they start out at in 3rd grade when they first take the test and they take it in 11th grade, can we track all the way through these kids? And then compare how they do in school, compare how they do.
One of the problems is that this particular test is changing all the time. And so even,
across the state.
yes, right. But the point to that is that even when you're tracing the same student from one grade level to the next, you're not necessarily comparing them against the same thing as the year before. Depending upon when, I'm not saying that every year it changes, but we've seen changes every so many years. And right now, we're at kind of a completely different point with this, given both the structural, the format changes, as well as the content changes. So it's, from here on out, it really is going to be difficult to compare going back even to 2014. After, students are taking tests in 2015. But yes, we've been having discussions about ways to dig in deeper to how our students have been faring, not only on these tests, but, going all along in their career, yeah.
Does the content really change that much on these tests that it wouldn't be beneficial to have like a chart like that? But I'm just picturing a line graph, right? And if there's a spike or a drop in a certain year, maybe you could coordinate that to a change in the test and maybe cause something. So I think that would be beneficial to see what the kind of life cycle of the students' grades look like. I mean, do the tests really change?
I'm not saying it's impossible to do. It's just, we don't, until we go through this first year, it's difficult to say. We do know that from some field-tested items from the past couple years that they've been very different than what students were used to. But
The test itself or the content?
Both.
I mean,
Both.
It's not, math is math, right? I mean, it's like algebra or calculus.
Well, the way that they're, and sometimes the way that they're being asked to explain it, some of the skills that they're being asked to demonstrate at different levels, it may change. Kim?
I was wondering from grade 4 to grade 5, grade 4, of course, being the last elementary level that we have, moving into grade 5. If I were to ask at grade 5 level, if that 88.3 could be separated by where they came from elementary school. Is that a piece of data that we...
I do have, I have information, I don't have it in here, but I do have information regarding how well each of the elementary schools stacked up against our overall scores, yes.
As far as the Common Core, or when it comes to math or any of the other courses, one thing I hear from parents is that they don't understand how it's being taught to the kids, and they're having a hard time teaching their kids. And in the past, that's been a big part of the students' education is through their parents. And if we're changing how things were done when we learned math, there has to be a gap in there where the parents aren't getting it, and how do they in turn teach our kids that method or through that method?
I know that's been an issue that, certainly has been something that's been a question, again, not just here, but in other districts, depending upon the type of series that they're using in math, for example. Right now, we're trying to be sensitive to that, and in the pilots, for example, that we have happening in 5th grade and 6th grade, one of the requirements for the teachers in choosing the series that they would use was that it would be something that parents would be able to use with their children as well. And so we're making efforts to try to bring that connection back into it.
Well, I'm just really having a hard time grasping the concept that, whether Johnny, well, he sort of gets it, or he understands the methodology, but, even though he didn't come up with 4 when he added 2 plus 2, but he had the right theory to try to get there. That, to me, why are we choosing to change how we've taught for years, how the parents have learned? It worked back then, it worked all the way up until most of us went through school. Now why the big change? Why do we need to have that change? And I mean, the kid playing in the outfield, yeah, he meant to catch that ball, but he didn't, but this guy's still safe, it just, I just don't follow why we're messing things up to the point where the parents can't follow it.
I'm sure I can't give you an answer that will really satisfy you, because I don't have a complete answer for that. I can tell you, though, that in terms of instruction, whether it's of math or reading or science or just about any content, that over the years, there have been a lot of people doing research on different practices, instructional practices, methodologies, etc. And I think a lot of textbook series have imitated that and tried to bring that to districts. And so I think districts have thought they have been, doing the right thing. As I said, I know that our teachers have been hearing those concerns and really have been taking that into consideration as we've been looking at, if there's another series. I think even with our everyday math series, for example, they're putting more things in, again, that are looking a little more traditional than they used to.
So as a board, how would you recommend to the board to go back to what it used to be so parents understand, or how to,
Well, I think I would probably recommend more information for parents. I don't necessarily immediately make a jump to going back to how it used to be, except that I think we have to listen to what the concerns are and find a way, as we're thinking about what our students need to be learning and how we need to be preparing them, that we make good, solid connections between what we're doing in the classroom and what the parents can do at home.
Yeah, because we have a very short time with our children where they spend all day in school, they get home, they try to do homework, mom and dad can't explain it fully, so they don't understand the lesson. They go back to class, say half the class gets it, the teacher moves on to the next thing, now all of a sudden the kid's being left behind. And that's the biggest resource to students learning are the parents. And I just really have a trouble, we're going to inform the parents more. What, we're going to send them back to school again? Or it's just a whole different process. And when you're in your 40s, your 50s, it's very hard to pick up a new process that you learn most of your life. And that's how are we going to, because it's going to affect the grade. I mean,
let's start with getting through this.
Okay.
Get us more educated on how the students,
So,
and maybe some things will come out of that.
I do want to point out that although we see some different things happening here in math where we see some fluctuation and some declines in part, that we also see very good scores up here. And I really don't want that to be lost on anybody. And you will see this over and over again in some other slides as well. The point is, obviously, we always want to make what we're doing better. When we look at reading, for example, you can see that we also have some similar patterns here in terms of scores, being higher and lower. Although when you look at grades 5 and 8, if you look right down at the bottom, you see in grade 5 in 2012, we started out at 79.1%, moved up to 81.5, and then 85.1. And in grade 8, we went from 89.5 to 92.5 to 93.1. Once again, if you follow a cohort, if you look at the students scoring advanced or proficient at 79.1% in 2012, and then move up to 2013 in grade 6, you see a 0.2 increase, which, is nominal. But then you go to 2014 in 7th grade, and you see that it bumps up to 87.7. So, just as certainly any declining scores that we see here or any declining scores that we, see in math, we want to know, well, what's happening there and what can we do to make that better. We also want to look at places where we see these increases, because then we want to take that and we want to replicate that success. So those are other questions that we ask. What are we doing right here?
Or is the test changed?
Or has it changed?
Has the test the way it's being tested changed?
Not yet,
Okay.
but this year it will. Except for some field-tested items, yes. So here is a 5-year comparison, okay, starting left to right in each of these. It goes from 2010 through 2014. And you see we start with reading grade 3 and reading grade 4, which look very similar. math grade 3 and math grade 4, again, which looks similar, although you can see a little more progress there in grade 4. And then the last set of bars is science in grade 4, which you can see is quite high. So again, in 3 and 4, our students have scored a little higher overall in math than in reading. But again, all scores have been consistently high. In fact, the lowest combined proficiency levels during this time is in reading grade 4 from 2013, which was 86%. Kim?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall some data that we had a while ago and make some connections here, but would it be fair to say that the math at this 3-4 level is pretty hard and fast? The reading is more literary, if not all literary, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So then, by the time you get up into the high school, there's a flip.
There's a flip before that.
Eighth grade?
Actually, one of our challenges is going to be getting more nonfiction into these grade levels because there's going to be a flip much, much sooner. Yeah, we're seeing a lot more. Yes, it does. In fact, when you look at the skills themselves, when they break out the skills themselves, and you look at those, many times what you will see is, grades 3 and 4 in anything literature related, extremely high. But when it comes to nonfiction, that's the bar that's much lower. And then as you start to go through, when you get especially maybe even to grade like 6, you may start to see that flip.
Well, and your maths are a lot of manipulators at this age. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Your concepts get
Mm-hmm.
difficult when you hit 8th grade, whatever.
Different concepts, different approaches.
Right.
Yes. So this is a 5-year comparison with grades 5 and 6. And again, you can see a slight fluctuation over these years. Again, the first two are reading for 5 and reading for 6, then math for the 2 grade levels, and ending with writing from grade 5. It's notable here that across the state, and we're not quite sure what the phenomenon is or why this is happening, but across the state, there seems to be a dip in 5th grade scores. That's not to say every school, every district, but oftentimes that does seem to be a trend. And then suddenly it picks back up, and it doesn't really seem to matter if 5th grade is part of an elementary school or part of a middle school or what the configuration is. But once again, although certainly the 5th grade scores and even the 6th grade reading scores are not as high as they had been, as Kim just indicated, you do start to see a sort of a difference in the type of reading that students are doing. So that certainly may account for some of that. And then the math, you can see, again, is still higher in 5 and 6 than the reading overall. Yes, Peter?
Just on the math, there's a little bit of bounce, but generally in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 over the 5-year period, there's a general decline in every grade on the scores. On the scores, on the bars. Now, there are some minor changes like math in this 2014 is up slightly. But if you look at it over a 5-year period, with, again, a little bit of bounce, you're seeing a slight decline across that in 5 and 6 as well as in 3 and 4.
Yes, and then can I just show you what happens when we get to 7 and 8?
You can. I just don't, because I don't recall, but is there a correlation to the everyday math in that data?
I can tell you that, again, right now, our Our 5th and 6th grades are in the midst of a pilot. They actually have 2 other series that they're piloting right now for math. The reason that they decided to do that, but that we did not do that at grades K to 4, was because their primary concern was that the time frame that they have to teach, in which they have to teach the everyday math, doesn't really coincide with the time that they should have for teaching it. And so I think they've done a lot, just in the short time I've been here, from discussions with teachers and principals and so forth. I think they have done a lot to try to accommodate for that, but I think that may be some of what you're seeing here. And then when we get to 7 and 8, we see, in some cases, at least in the reading in 7 and 8 and the math in grade 7 overall, we see a bit of a bump again, a bump up. And then when you look at the math, again, this is something certainly we want to look at, what happened there, how, why is that 2014 bar, about 10 points higher than what it was in 2013. So that will be something that we'll be considering as well. Okay. So then I also looked at this, and again, in terms of comparing our district with the state over the last 5 years, but I looked at the grade spans at 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8. So these next couple slides will imitate this. So you can see, once again, that the proficiency and advanced levels, when you take 3 and 4 together, the proficiency and advanced levels are hovering around 90% for our district, where the state average was between 69 and 75% in reading. In math, our students also outperform the state average. Within this span, we can see that, again, the scores have fluctuated a little bit, and we're a little bit lower last year than the previous couple of years. But again, we also see that that was a trend at the state level, too.
I think we all know there are some low-performing school districts in the state. Is it possible we have the numbers that we can compare Methacton to some of our, like Perkiomen, Valley, Upper Merion, some of our local districts around here, to see how Methacton is doing compared to our local?
I was going to try to include that as part of this presentation. However, it became very messy because, once again, when the state put out school performance profiles beginning last year, we no longer have access to the scores, the proficiency scores, as we did up through 2012. So I can go into the archives in PDE and get those raw scores from 2012 and before, and I can put that together and, make those comparisons. The problem is with school performance profile in elementaries, for example, some elementaries have grade spans of 3, 4, and 5 that they're looking at. Some only have 3 and 4, and they put them all together. So you can't really pull them apart. So it makes it a little more difficult, but I will continue to try to look at ways of doing that once the new school performance profiles come out and see what I can bring you. Okay? Okay, again, grades 5 and 6. Now, again, just going back for a moment, in 3, 4, again, our math was a little bit higher than our reading, although our reading was up around 90%. In 5, 6, we saw a drop in the reading a bit, a little bit of a drop in the math, but it's still up relatively high. And then in 7, 8, once again, it's back up. Okay. Oh, wait. What I did want to show you one other point here, and that is, if I can make this pointer work, but I can't. Oh, there. Okay. I want to call your attention to this bar and this bar. One of the board goals that was established was that over the next 4 years to see a 10% increase based on the 2013 baseline data. When you look at those two bars that I just showed you from the 5th, 6th grade span, if we were to progress along with our scores in that way, we would meet that. Because right there you see it's about an 81% and an 84% between 2013 and 2014. And so that's the type of progress that we would be looking for across the board to meet that. Okay. These last few pie charts that I wanted to show you basically demonstrate a visual of the percentage of students scoring at each proficiency level. So as you can see here, and this is a pattern that's repeated over 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, Methacton has the majority of its students scoring in the advanced category. That's the darkest green. And the next highest percentage is scoring proficient. So again, when you take those two together, you can see that we're looking at around 90%, and we have, students, we have single-digit numbers for students scoring at basic and below basic. We see the same thing in grades 5 and 6, and when you look at, especially when you look at math in grades 5 and 6, you can see those advanced students, 71%, and then another 18% in the proficient level. And just to point out to you, it's the way that we have so many proficient and advanced students that really presents a whole new challenge to us, and that is how we're going to continue to move and continue to grow all of our students, including those advanced students, along with the students that are basic and below basic, and the ones that are proficient as well.
And this is all students, right?
This is all students in those grade spans. And then in 7 and 8, again, same pattern. So again, much to be proud of with this, that we have students scoring, that we have so many students scoring at the advanced levels, and that we have such a high combined rate of advanced and proficient students. So in terms of summarizing the numbers, again, we see that our achievement in grades 3 through 8 has generally been high, but somewhat stagnant, fluctuating slightly over the past 5 years. Our district is challenged to move all students higher, including the high number of proficient and advanced students. We know when we do look at the school performance profile that growth is going to be a factor in that, and it is not something that we've typically spent our time thinking about, and so we're going to be looking at that in different ways. We also recognize that the state tests represent one source of data. Therefore, teachers and administrators are looking at results from district-based assessments. They're using diagnostic performance measures to identify student needs. So some of the main changes over time that we need to be aware of include these from the state. As I had mentioned earlier, we've seen the elimination of the PSSAM since getting the flexibility waiver. In 2013 and 14, The state incorporated some field-tested items associated with the PA Core. They looked at anywhere that the PA Core, the skills in the PA Core, and in the standards from the early 2000s, the legacy standards, where they sort of mirrored each other, and so they brought some questions in, but they also changed some of the formatting in the way they brought the questions in. So we did hear some students talking about some confusion that they had during the midst of taking those tests at that time. Also, in terms of moving from AYP to SPP, the School Performance Profile for reporting purposes, the School Performance Profile is gradually bringing in a number of new metrics that we were not previously concerned with. As I mentioned before, one of those is growth. In the future, we're going to see a closing the achievement gap metric. And then also new testing format and content in the spring of 2015. It will be based on the PA Core. Reading and writing will be combined into a single English Language Arts assessment for all grades, grade 3 through 8. And each subject area, ELA, math, and science, will be administered within separate weeks. What's traditionally been done is the math and reading have been together and administered over the course of a week and a half, and they've gone back and forth between a math test and a reading test. This time it's going to be all math 1 week, all ELA 1 week, and all science 1 week. In our district, we've had changes here that certainly have affected the curriculum and instruction. We've had different leadership, obviously, not only at the level of superintendent, but in my office. I've only been here since the end of January. In pupil services, Dr. Angstead became the director within the last couple of months. And really, the pupil services, special education in particular, and curriculum are two areas that really need stability and collaboration. And Dr. Angstead and I have been working toward this. And we're going to continue working together, reviewing our programs, our programming, our resources, looking at the way we're looking at data. Some of you have asked questions this evening about, digging deeper into recognizing trends with our students in that, and all of this is a part of what we would like to do more efficiently and effectively. You had your configuration of Skyview and Arcola campus, and that's not to say that that's not a good thing to have done. The point of showing that here is the idea of the adjustment that goes along with that. And, so sometimes you may see a fluctuation that in part reflects those adjustments. The growth in technology integration, again, not at all a bad thing, but we're currently bringing technology into instruction in our curriculum more and more, and there are going to be, some growing pains with that as well, as teachers learn better how to instruct students using technology, and as students get, used to that being a part of their practice. So as we look ahead, again, we know the challenges. We want to generate some ideas for meeting them. So I looked at math at the 3 different levels, at K to 4, 5, and 6, and 7 to 12. One of the things we're doing at the elementary level is to bring sort of a renewed focus on math to analyze students' progress. We were working with the Montgomery County IU to put data teams into place and to look at what types of resources and supports we might need. We've done a lot, the district has done a lot over the last several years with RTII for literacy, and we want to make sure that we're giving the attention that we need to math as well. So throughout the year, teams will work to ensure alignment with PA Core and to implement appropriate instructional strategies. We'll be using some diagnostic tests to see where our students are as we move along. We have the current implementation of the math pilots in grades 5 and 6. We expect that we'll make a decision about math programming at this level by May of 2015. And in 7 through 12, we really need to have ongoing articulation discussions and look at how our curriculum needs to be realigned with PA Core across grade levels by the end of this year. We had some teachers beginning to work with this last summer, but I'd like to put a more structured effort into that as we move through this school year. Yes?
I'm sorry, just one question. I know we probably touched on this before, but the pilot children that you're doing in 5th and 6th grade, are we communicating and teaching the teachers in 7th how to teach those kids that now have different math than everybody else?
We are not yet, but we will be having those meetings and taking a look at that. We need to make sure that everybody knows what the students have gotten in those grades clearly. Yes.
Keep it or we don't.
Right. They need to know, right. We need, and that's part of what our work will be, to make sure that we have, if there are any gaps or overlaps or whatever, that we have those and that teachers in 7th grade know. Yes.
My question is, as far as the PA Core, was that we have the median percentage in the state around 66, 67% for the state. Was the PA Core designed to get students from, whether it's 30%, 40%, up to that 67%? And if that's the case, and the way we were doing it for years had us up at 80, 88, 90, why would we want to change to a PA Core format when we were already at 80, 90% when they designed, say, the PA Core to go from, bring people from a 40 up to a 60?
The reasoning behind the core in general is because one of the things that has become evident is, although whether it's Methacton or any other district in Pennsylvania, or really any other district in other states, students may have been scoring very high, up around 90% or whatever it might be on those state exams. When it comes to looking at how our students have been scoring on other types of tests, international type tests, for example, we're coming in very low. And what educators and the people doing the research and so forth behind the standards were seeing was that we didn't really have the higher expectations built into the standards that we had. In Pennsylvania, for example, our standards have traditionally been somewhat discrete skills. Do this, then move on, but not a lot in terms of the thought process that really goes into it. And really, that's what the core is meant to do. It's meant to raise the level of thinking. It's not necessarily to raise or to lower scores on any level. It's meant more to raise the level of thinking of our kids.
Okay, so how does demographics play into this? And how did our school compare internationally? I mean, as far as the rest of the state, I don't care about the rest of the state, I care about Methacton. So what, by changing all this, does this, what do they use for a demographic scale or a sampling to implement this? And how did we do based on tests internationally?
I don't know the answer to that.
I think that's an important part, being that we're going to a PA Core standard that is a blanket standard that doesn't take into any counting of demographics.
But I think it's trying to raise the level of thinking, which would be something that really for students from Methacton, it would really, I think, complement the demographic of students that we have here.
Does it? I look at our demographics, you look at the medium income, you have parents that are successful, they want their children to strive to be successful, whereas maybe a different demographic, the parents aren't worried about their kids striving to do better than what they did, and you're going to have a different result. So instead of grouping Methacton in with the rest of the state on some program like this, I'd like to know the real numbers for Methacton and work from there rather than, well, here's the state level. Where have we been and what can we do to go beyond that?
Well, I think we have to show the state, right, just because we're in the Commonwealth and we have to show where we stack up there, but maybe to, I can't remember if it was Maria or Kathleen's point earlier, compare us to some other high-performing districts, either in southeast or Pennsylvania or throughout the state, just to get a snapshot of that as well.
That's, and, and quite honestly, when a new, when new standards are introduced and new testing is done, generally, when this was done elsewhere, you saw a dip when it started. It was an implementation dip. But you get to understand then what the expectations are, and you work toward them. And again, I think we have the type of student that's going to be able to do that successfully.
Mary,
Yes.
is there, some states are part of the Common Core from the federal government. Some states are not following those guidelines. So is it difficult then to compare? I mean, if they're all going to have, some states are all going to have different.
Well, we really shouldn't have been able to compare states for the last 12 years because everybody's been using everything different. States that are using the Common Core standards may or may not be using national assessments. Pennsylvania has declared that we will not use national assessments. So, yeah, as far as comparing state to state, it still is a little more difficult. But again, to your question about, how do we compare with other similar districts around us, I think that makes sense. And then lastly, we're also looking at some major work with our English language arts. We want to ensure appropriate literacy practices across all grade levels and across all content areas. That includes in reading classrooms and English classrooms, but it also includes in social studies classrooms and science classrooms, etc. This is going to be a long process. We're looking at least through this year and next. But what we ultimately want to come out with is curriculum developed that reflects instruction of nonfiction reading and writing. Just to be very clear on this, the point is not to make every teacher a reading teacher. As someone who was a high school English teacher, I can tell you I was not a reading teacher. I taught a subject. But students read, we all read. If all of us here were given something in an area that we're not especially drawn to or comfortable with, we would read that very differently than something we really dive into. So the idea is to help teachers understand how to help their students better comprehend what it is they're reading and how to write about that more effectively. Writing is one of those skills that we've kind of put on the back burner. I don't just mean us. I mean in general, we've put that on the back burner in education over these past several years because of AYP, and it's one of the most critical skills our students will need. So we will be reviewing curriculum and resources for reading and writing K-8 for alignment with the PA Core, and we'll also in that be looking at instructional strategies, resources that we'll need, etc. And I should say not just for the PA Core, but really to make sure that we are delivering instruction to really help our students as best we can. And then we'll also be looking to provide professional development and resources for content areas outside of English. In the short term, We're looking at reviewing and working with some updated PSSA released items so that our students can at least get a sense of what types of questions they may be getting asked when those tests come around in the spring. And so again, as we recognize our challenges, we're going to continue working together to identify the best ways to meet them.
Very good, Mary. Thank you very much for the presentation. If we could go back to our seats, and then we can have the floor for any additional questions.
You're welcome.
Good job.
If it would please the board, I'd like to be able to get this presentation to the board with some of the additional back-end spreadsheets that may be of some interest to you. And what we could do is allow you time to look at the information and maybe come back next Tuesday with some additional questions. Certainly, as you recognize from the beginning of the presentation, Mary plans to, once the data is released from the SPP, to come back and to do a follow-up report, not only on the high school achievement area, but SPP overall for the district. Are there any questions at this time for her? If not, then we'll get the presentation in your hands, and we will look forward to answering some questions that you might have at next Tuesday's meeting. Thank you, Mary. Good presentation.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, if there's no other speakers or presentations, we'll move on to item number 6, voting items for next week. Dr. Zerbe.
We will be asking the board to approve the minutes. We have some fiscal items, list of bills, the treasurer's report, parent transportation contract. Mr. Whiteleather, do you mind just mentioning? We typically have a parent transport contract that involves the need for us to contract with the parent in order to provide the transportation services in exchange for a fee that's established. The reason being is either the child needs either specific care, has a specific issue related to taking our transportation, or is in a geographical area that is more expensive for us to transport than it would be for the parent to be paid to transport the child. There's an item under fiscal bills for resolution 1407 for reimbursement of technology purchases. Mr. Whiteleather, you want to explain that real quick?
The way we structure our technology purchases is we, throughout the course of the fiscal year, will purchase items that at the end of the year, what we will do is we will initiate a lease to reimburse the school district for the cost we've outlaid for that equipment throughout the year. The purpose of the resolution, what it does is allow us to go back to do a tax-exempt lease. If we would not do this resolution, we could still do a lease, but it would be considered a taxable lease. Difference between the two is be a slightly higher rate for the school district. So by approving this resolution, it allows the district to go back for purposes of including all of the items that we would purchase throughout the course of the year, all the way through the conclusion of the year, and then do that lease at a tax-exempt rate, which we've done in the past as well. This is a repeat of what we did last year as well.
Thank you. The fifth item under 6.2, therapy source agreement for contract of speech and language support. From time to time, the special education department needs additional speech and language support services, and this allows us to have an on-call agreement with them for those particular services. I believe the agreement is attached for your review.
I was was just going to ask, is that a rollover renewal kind of thing? We had this in the past.
Susan, this is the same company we used for these time-to-time services in the past, correct? Yeah.
Could I just ask a question about section 1.6 of that, or at least bring it up right now? I see in that 1.6, there's a comment about that therapy source shall determine the compensation of the therapist. I just wanted to get an idea as to what information we have as to what rates we would pay and all that. I didn't see anything necessarily in the contract and how that works. So maybe we could get that information at some point.
Any other questions on fiscal item 6.2? If not, 6.3, personnel. We have several items on the agenda. Elimination of a position. This is the position of supervisor of transportation, previously held by retired transportation supervisor Terry Turley. We have an item for establishment of positions. We have two items: Secretary of Central Registration, per the attached job description. That'll be a MESPA position. And we have a transportation manager position with the attached job description. That will be a Mayo position. And both of them we're asking to be effective October 28, 2014. Under personnel, we have some resignations as listed there. Bus aides, we have the hiring of, under 6.6, for the employment of an administrative person, Timothy Murch. Timothy will be our third special education supervisor, which will bring our total complement to the requested level that's been approved under our agreement and study for the special education services. Flipping over on the agenda, we have item 6.7, personnel, employment classified as listed. We have classified long-term substitutes, nothing listed there. Change of status for personnel. Bring to your attention Eileen Brown, Secretary to the Director of Technology, with the classification change from C3 to C4. Her hourly rate will be $22.20, effective July 1, 2014. This is as a result of a review of the position for Secretary of Central Registration. We recognize that Eileen was the only director or secretary that was currently classified as a C3, and because of the additional duties being implemented in that office of technology, Eileen, we believe, should be moved from a C3 to a C4. Under personnel, we have some uncompensated leave. 611, we have some supplemental contracts, winter coaches, and Edward McCaffrey. Under 6.12, we have some personnel, community education hires, some volunteers under 6.13. Under 6.14, we have some personnel classified substitute. Under 6.15, we have programs. Mary, do you mind addressing those programs for us, please?
We have a gift of 3 Samsung Chromebooks from DonorsChoose.org at a value of $787.55. And we also have, we're seeking approval for the field trip for the high school ski club to Winter Park Resort in Colorado in January. And it would be the cost of substitutes for that.
Before I go on to policy, are there any questions related to any of the other items that were previously that I mentioned on the agenda?
Dave, can we go back to personnel supplemental contract to winter coaches?
Under 611.1?
Yes.
Okay.
How's it determined what a coach makes for whether it's a summer or winter, spring, any particular type of sport? How is there, I mean, we have coaches that are at $8,500, nearing $8,500 for the winter season, all the way down to $1,500 for the winter season. How do we arrive at these, and is there any justification based on, well, their winning record, whatever it is, or is this all just come down to seniority? And so that's my question.
That's a fair question. Mr. Harney, would you mind commenting on that?
There's a formula that's actually used that takes into effect about 5 or 6 different things. The amount of kids that are being supervised, the pressure or the finances that are collected or used by that coach. I'm having a hard time at 9:30 at night thinking of all 5, but there's a variety of things that come together that build the number of points for a particular position. Those points are then multiplied by whatever that dollar figure is in the contract for that year. Then there is a multiplier of time. So if you've got experience, that's the final kind of multiplier in that. But there are a series of different criteria that build the point structure for each coaching position. And it does increase with time, but it also has to do with the actual position, the actual sport, and the various things that work to make that position either more difficult, less difficult, more high profile, less high profile, that sort of thing.
Now, is this worked into the teacher's normal contract, or is this something in addition? Is it like a supplement to that contract?
Yes, the actual point value is in the teacher contract. What was in the teacher contract for the last 15 years or 10 years was a pledge by both sides to come together to look at that structure and try to come up with a way to make it more, I guess, equitable. We've tried to work through that, and to be honest with you, I forget where we are in that process.
Yeah, and I'm involved in that. That process has been going on. Is it 7 years?
Almost 10, I thought.
Okay. It was certainly before my time, but I recognized it as an issue where the system as it was in place was inequitable to a degree where we might have some assistant coaches, say for example for girls basketball, making $300, and boys basketball assistant coaches might be making $1,500. And the issues were because there were points in time or in history that certain decisions were made to say, stop, we're not making any new changes, or we're not, taking any new increases because of the way the system was functioning. And so we spent a good part of last year, when I say we, I'm talking about Mr. Harney, myself, Stuart was involved from time to time, working with the association, which is a committee that was formed under the MEA agreement back in September of 2013, which was part of the language required for us to get together and work and solve this particular issue. We've been doing that. We have some language that needs to get finalized in a document that will eventually need to come before the board and come before the association to be agreed upon to correct some of the inequities and to better define what it is people are getting paid for and why. So what Mr. Harney had mentioned, those sets of criteria are part of that, and I believe there's 6 total, and that has to come before you. But it was in such poorly worded format that it has not been before this board in my tenure here. But it's my understanding that it may have been prior.
Our budget on this is, if I remember correctly, is about $550,000 a year in the coaching, in the salary and benefits for our sports programs. Excuse me. And I imagine those numbers also include their PESers as far as retirement. I think we should look back and reevaluate this, because as we involve more public money in different things we're doing, maybe coaching is something that maybe the team would rather get an outside coach just specific to that sport and for the talent as far as the coach, and maybe they want to fundraise to hire a coach that's more on the professional side rather than a teacher that's doing it on the side as a stipend in their pay. Not that I have anything against the teacher wanting to coach and stuff, but I think and it might lessen it when we have a $550,000 burden in our budget. There's another way of looking at this, and I think it's something that we should discuss as a board and see where we should go. And then, as far as contract time coming up, at least fix what the formula is and try to, because if their retirement's based on their last 3 highest years and they're the head coach and they're getting another $8,500 or $9,000 a year, I imagine that's part of that calculation as far as their retirement also.
I think you have a lot of good questions, and I think what's probably most appropriate is to allow me the opportunity to get this document together and before you, so that we can talk about those issues as it relates to paying coaches directly and how that paying coaches directly impacts our budget. So I'd rather not give it to you as in its existing form, because it really is not an appropriate. It's not an appropriate format, but it is. We're working towards having that, and I hope within the next month or so that I can get that before you. And certainly, it will likely be a conversation of the Finance Committee as well. So good questions. I'm not really prepared to answer them until I get some more information in front of you, so we can look at the overall picture. Because I think once you read the document, you'll better understand and maybe have additional questions than you have even this evening. Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
You think you'll be any problems filling these vacant positions, or you think they'll get filled?
Mr. Harney, you know
It's fairly standard. Every season we'll go into 1 or 2, and it's Mr. Spiewak beats the bushes. He does whatever he can. 9 times out of 10, we get them all filled.
Could I just go back to another one in the 6-point range? 6.4, the establishment of positions. The second position, transportation manager, that's to replace the supervisor. Is that right? I mean, that position was eliminated.
I didn't clearly articulate that position. Let me just do that, if I may. We eliminated the position of the supervisor of transportation. And that person made in the neighborhood of about $90,000 a year. That person was primarily responsible for running the transportation services for the Methacton School District. So not only did they, under that salary and position and a set of responsibilities, they were not only required to do routing, but manage the safety components, but also manage staff and do scheduling and anything that's related to transportation. As you're well aware, we outsourced transportation starting in July 1 of 2014 to First Student, and those services now in large and in part are now part of the operation that we pay First Student to coordinate. What we believe we need as a result of that transition and the subsequent retirement of Terry Turley, our director, or I keep saying director, our transportation supervisor, is oversight on a financial basis, on a daily basis, and have the ability to not only chip in with having a CDL license, if we're short a driver here or there, maybe, but also to be able to provide a resource for the district and our eyes on that particular operation. What we found as Terry retired, what we recognized, and after looking at other districts that had outsourced their transportation services, all of the districts in Montgomery County and Chester County and Delaware County that outsourced also have a transportation director, liaison, coordinator in this position to do what we're asking to do. So we feel that by taking this position from a $90,000 position down to a $50,000 position, we can get the oversight necessary to continue the service and coordination between the district and the service provider.
Thank you. And the other position, the Secretary for Central Registration, that's a totally new position?
That is a new position, new titled position. Several years ago, the district had what was called Central Student Registration, where there was one location in the district where parents would come and register their children for attending any of our 8 schools. It could have been 7 at the time. With that said, and with the advent of PIMS, the Pennsylvania Information Management System, that basically the big data collection warehouse that the state now requires us to report all data, not only student enrollment data, but transportation data, special education data, you name it, human resource data, all that data goes into the PIMS system. The trend in Pennsylvania for districts that had what's called localized student registration, meaning student registration happening in each of the buildings, which we currently do right now in Methacton, basically puts a $12,000 or $14,000 decision in the hands of 8 different secretaries on a regular basis. Because what I mean by that is the enrollment data and the accuracy of that enrollment data is directly related to the funding that we receive from the Commonwealth. So to ensure the accuracy, districts like Methacton, and that's what our recommendation is going here, is centralizing the registration process at the admin building so that the data accuracy level rises from this level up to this level and reduces the impact that individuals in the buildings could have adversely on the district if mistakes were made. And that's the primary purpose, is to improve accuracy of the data. The secondary and alternative purpose is to have that individual be a backup to our single individual who has the PIMS administrative role in the district. Diane Malin is for lack of a better term, our data coordinator. So now this person would also support her in the role and set a foundation for us to not only have a backup to Diane, but also to have a team so that as we move forward with our data-driven decision-making processes, we're going to be able to drive information, not just spreadsheets, down to teachers, and not in a fashion that's appropriate for them, making not only for us in the business office and the administrative offices making decisions, but for our teachers that utilize data. So that's the game plan as part of these 2 positions being before you this evening.
On that second position, Secretary for Central Registration, it sounds like it's a really desirable thing to do, but one of the conversations we've been having is the need to have reduction in expenses. And this seems like an administrative position, so we're adding to the administrative burden by adding an additional position. Is it not possible that we could train the people who are currently doing this work so that they could be effective at doing it and thereby not add this additional position?
That's a good question, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, and I'll explain. As part of what our hope is we cannot hire someone from the outside to take this position. We need to have someone internally to accept and apply and accept the position of Central Registration Secretary. The meaning being they need to have a base for the district, and they need to know the current registration process. When that occurs, it could and it will provide an opening elsewhere that will eventually allow us to, either through attrition or through some reassignment, to bring our total number of employees in the MESPA group to an even level. So even though it's a new position here before you today, and it will likely, when it's initiated, create one additional position, we believe that what we know about our personnel internally, that this will be, by January, will be a flat MESPA organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just to be clear, that's going to be an internal hire then, that position?
It has to be.
So there'll be no headcount addition as a result of this?
That's correct.
Okay.
On to policies. Before you, for next week's meeting, we have policies 124, 124.1, 125, 126, 127, and 130 for first reading. Are there any questions related to any of those 6 policies that I might be able to answer this evening?
Yes, so on policy 126, class size, as far as the number, I notice 30's mentioned, 25's mentioned. Is that something that the board set as the policy as far as the size, or is that something based on also the teacher's contract, what's in the current contract?
There are no class sizes in the teacher's contract, so it's a board policy that's been on the books for quite some time. Those levels was established quite a long time ago. But as far as teacher contract, there's no limitations in the teacher contract on our class size.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question on that same policy. The mention about the board having to receive information by October 1st of the current school year for any of the listing of classes, I guess I just wanted to ask the question. I understand why, we would want to know about that, but at that point, we're not going to be able to really react or do anything at that particular point. I mean, is that correct? Is it possible to get information sooner than that, so that if a decision had to be made to take some action, or do we think that we're not really going to be able to take action in the current school year regarding a situation like that? I was just trying to get an idea as to what the thought process was around the date and what have you. It says, because it does say notify the I guess board, but then what's the board supposed to do about it at that point in time?
I think what the conversation was, and certainly members of the policy committee can jump in, but the way the policy was originally written, it did not provide an opportunity or a mechanism to require the administration to give something to the board for review and then put an action in place for the board to do something with that information. One of the things that we talked about was, just your question. It's a reactive response, but it's certainly better than, at least the conversation was that it's certainly better than what may be currently in place. The time frame, depending on the school year, but in the last recent years, we've been finalizing schedules late into July and August. So by the time we finalize a schedule and then get those schedules dispersed to students with enrollments that we certainly have an enrollment period between the middle of August and the middle of September that we see some significant ins and outs based on the start of school year and based on the transition. We felt that at the very least, we got the information into the board's hands so that we know how to establish the offerings in the course catalogs, specifically if we're talking high school, the course catalogs for the coming year. So we can be reactive behind by 1 year if that's appropriate for the board. But that's what we considered here. Other considerations kind of put this back at a 3-year process, and the board didn't think that was, or the committee did not think that was appropriate.
Yeah, and I was just trying to understand it a little bit more, because I was originally thinking when I read it that, would there ever be a scenario where the board would get information before the school year started to say if, listing a class didn't have a certain minimum number of students, we'd just say we're not going to have it type of situation. But that's not where we were going. It's not the current year.
It really wasn't a practical application of our ability to do that, and that's typical of what our discussion was. I mean, we need to be able to be flexible in order to meet any of the changes in registrations or declines, but we also need to be responsive, and that's why the language has changed that we'll provide the board some information, but then we also need the board to make a decision about that information by a specific date, so that the administration now knows that they will offer those classes in the subsequent year, or they may not be able to offer those classes in the subsequent year. I think it puts more clarity around the steps, and it certainly gives it, more of a process than just a statement of, so we'll give you the numbers. Well, what are we supposed to do with that?
Then on 617, there's a second reading for the censure, to eliminate censure, then with the tobacco policy, and we have a district school report card item to eliminate. Are there any questions on 616 or 617? If no questions, the only thing I have under other, I just want to make an announcement.
I just want to make an announcement that we completed all the reviews of the utility savings for the consolidated summer work schedule. Just to let the board know that we did work 4 10-hour days throughout a majority of the summer. Not only did, and I'll tell you what that number is here in just a second, not only did we have a cost savings greater than what we budgeted, but we also had some interesting relationships within our custodial staff that have never happened before. We had the concept of team cleaning, where we got people out of their comfort zones and moved them into buildings that they may not have been comfortable with, and we saw an improvement in relationships among the custodial staff. I will tell you that that wasn't the thought going in. The thought going in that there would be some issues, and maybe there were, but they weren't as significant as originally anticipated. And surprisingly to our building principals, as well as to the custodial staff, not only did they do a good job, but they got done surprisingly earlier than they have in previous years. And the technology department recognized that as well, because by having team cleaning occur, they were finishing buildings. The technology department was able to come into that building, finish a building, rather than the last week of school having to be at 8 buildings, or the last week of summer having to be at 8 buildings to get stuff done. And so it was really well planned. Tim Barbagallo and Mr. Jacoby did a great job of coordinating that. I'm sorry. But I just wanted to say that, so we saved $70,000. We were expecting anywhere between 25 and maybe 30. So that's where we're at. And just so the board knows, we put a survey out last week, or Angela put a survey out last week, just to get staff's feedback on whether or not, if we did anything like that again, how we can improve the experience for our folks. So that's all I have under other.
Any other new business?
Yeah. All right. I have a couple of things that I'd like to throw out to the board. Since this is a work session, right? I hope back in March, I had brought up something, I guess, about Holy Rosary students were utilizing an app called GoToMeeting, and that their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students had iPads in the classrooms, and they didn't miss any snow days. Now, I know that Pennsylvania now has just redefined the concept of the snow day, announcing that schools can offer cyber days when kids can't make it into the classrooms. I know that Dr. Zerbe, one of his meetings with his cabinet, that was one of the topics of discussion, was the new flexible instructional days that they have. And I guess I just wanted to have the board, I would like make a recommendation, I guess, just for me, that the board has updates on this, the status of this initiative, and maybe that the policy committee should be looking into establishing some kind of a policy on this flexible instructional days. That was my one thing.
Okay, I think they're both good ideas.
Okay, I have another one.
Go ahead, go for it.
Keep going, I'm on a roll. All right. This is something that I found a while ago. It's called Rachel's Challenge, and I know I've mentioned it, but it says, I'm just not going to read you all of this. Don't get scared. It just says that each day 160,000 students do not attend school because that is a place where they are bullied, teased, and harassed. By turning a tragic death at Columbine High School into a mission for change, Rachel's Challenge is dedicated to making schools safer, more connected places for students and educators to live and learn. The Rachel's Challenge, Awaken the Learner, is a 5-step school improvement process. It consists of several empowering components. These complementing elements are designed to create a culture of kindness and compassion and to equip students and adults with resources to combat bullying and reduce feelings of isolation and despair. The program is inspired by the writings and life of 17-year-old Rachel Joy Scott, who was the first student killed at Columbine High School in '99. She left a legacy of reaching out to those who were different, who were picked on by others, who were new at her school. One of the testimonies, it's a 5-step program, and it's tailored to like elementary, middle, high school, so there's different steps in the process. One of the schools, like I said, I'm not going to read it all, just this one thing that came back from the Rockwell Independent School District in Texas was that the results were truly amazing. Besides that, they helped improve math, reading, and science scores, as well as a reduction in disciplinary referrals and dropout rates. So I guess I would like the board to, it is called Rachel's Challenge. It's all on the website. It just, to me, sounds like something that we might be interested in looking into further.
Can you, I know you shared that before, but can you give that or send a link to Dr. Zerbe and he can distribute it to the whole board so we can have it to read? And then I think, the administration can look into that, see if it's appropriate for us. And I think probably another good thing would be for us to get an update. I know that we're putting topics in the hopper for board discussion, but just an update on what we are doing with bullying, throughout the district. Does that sound good?
And can we find out what we're going to do about snow days this year, if we have this bad in the winter? If we're going to have a plan like that?
Sorry? A plan for snow days, assuming another snowmageddon.
I'm sorry, a plan for snow days?
Like Maria just mentioned?
Oh, for the flexible school.
Okay. The flexible days option under PDE requires that a system be in place and you apply for that prior to, I believe, maybe November 11th or sometime in November. Currently, it's my understanding across Montgomery County that there's one school district seriously looking at applying for that. It does have specific requirements for us to ensure that a continuum of instruction occurs without a change in the instruction, meaning we couldn't just have students log on and fill out worksheets that are banked along the side here for days that were snow. So, for example, if we're teaching a lesson in psychology and it's about X, Y, and Z, we need to be able to, without a hiccup, be able to implement a virtual second day lesson related to that particular topic. And not only do we need to have a platform and a system available to do that, but our teachers need to be trained to do that. We need to be able to ensure that our students have appropriate access to do that. So we've discussed and we've looked at the rules around that flexible days. It is very intriguing, and it makes sense that if we had those systems in place, that we would take advantage of them. I want the board to know that as part of where we need to take this district, it really includes putting those systems in place to do just this. Not only for the purposes of getting rid of snow days, but really for the purposes of putting our students in a learning environment, not only brick and mortar, which they're familiar and we're familiar with, but putting them into a virtual learning environment so that they're more prepared not only to be successful in college or for work, but to continue learning long after they leave the Methacton School District. So it's really an opportunity to address the lifelong learning of our students at Methacton, and we certainly need to move in that direction. And I do plan to speak to the board about that in more specifics, but it's of my opinion at this point that the flexible days is an added benefit to us getting to that point, and could be financially a benefit for us long-term as well, as we consider our investments in that. Imagine being able to set a calendar and in lieu of any power outages within our community, be able to start and finish on time as expected, without having to call at 4:30 in the morning. So Maria, your point's well taken, and we had some significant discussion at the table related to curriculum and how this can work, and our technology director was right on board with it. We have some ideas that we want to bring forward to you, and certainly we'll do that in the very near future.
Anything else, or Maria, anything else, or just two? That was great, thank you. Other new business? Okay, courtesy of the floor. John, good.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Mary Katona's presentation this evening was very useful, I thought, and overall Methacton does pretty well. But back in the days when Skyview was under consideration, I use that term with some caution, I did a study comparing schools where the kids are in K to 4, and then they switch schools to go to a 5 to 6, versus being in schools where they go from K through 5 or K through 6. And there are impacts on test scores of those transitions from one school to another. In Bucks County, for instance, all the school districts have K to 6 elementaries. And locally, before we went to the Skyview addition to our set of schools, Norristown had done that, and Upper Merion had done it. And in reviewing the test scores, it was unequivocal that the K to 6 arrangement is better in terms of test scores, and there's some psychology involved in kids moving from one school to another. They lose their old friends, they get new friends. The teachers are probably more cohesive in a K to 6 learning environment than in two separate schools. And along these lines, the best school in the whole state, I think it's a Mastery School in Philadelphia, where the kids go from like K to 12 in the same building. So I think that my conclusion was that when we went from a K to 5 and a 6 to 8 to a K to 4 and a 5 to 6 and then a 7 to 8, that our test scores were going to go down. And that's got, that's the psychology of kids being in school rather than what the teacher is giving it for instruction in a particular course in a particular grade. When we say learn, lead, and succeed together, the study that I did and presented to the board at that time had zero impact.
Thank you. Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Candy?
I'm sitting here tonight, and I was listening to Glenn Willard give another... Candy Oliver, Eagleville. It's been a long, long night. I was sitting here tonight, I was listening to bond report again, and what I take away from this, since I'm just an average high school graduate, is I've watched the school district spend and borrow their way into debt, massive debt. And the lack of bringing up Skyview. I spent a lot of time in this room since 2006. And I listened to all the reasons why we needed Skyview. And one of the main reasons was enrollment projections. And I have listened to enrollment projections, not since Skyview was built. The projection for 2014 was supposed to be 6,500 students. From what I understand right now, we have 4,986. That's a difference of 1,514 kids. That's a lot of students. We have a building that sits there that is big enough to hold 2 elementary schools. I don't know how much you're paying this gentleman to do your enrollment capacity. I just gave you maybe some information for free. You can take 2 of our elementary schools and force them in there. I don't agree with Mr. Phillips when he talked about enrollment going up. I don't. My feeling, my intuition, I do not see Methacton's enrollment ever going back up to the way it was. I don't. This month alone, there is 7 share sales in this school district. We average at least 4 every month for the last couple of years. I haven't seen the economy get better. I mean, if you listen to the federal government, we're all rolling in dough here. We're doing very well. I don't see it. People that I know, I don't see it personally in my own life. These are serious. You're going to be paying off a lot of debt. The mistake that was made, Skyview was wanted by a very small minority of people that yelled the loudest, and it was put in. Now we're paying this off. You have another project you want to spend a lot of money for, and you're borrowing. I don't see where it ties into education. I want to see you spend money on education. I want to see you deal with education when you sit here at every meeting, not sports and put out all this. Sports is extracurricular. Our kids, for what you're paying, the generous salaries and benefits that you're giving the teachers and administrators, our test scores should be better than what they are. We should see excellent test scores. And I really don't think you need to compare our test scores to other school districts right this time. I mean, I sat in Mr. Verb's, Representative Verb's hearing last week, and I heard a lot of superintendents speak, including Dr. Zerbe. And I heard a couple school districts sit there and talk about the massive cuts that they had to make so it wouldn't hurt their taxpayers. I have not heard that in this room, ever. We had a budget. You handed the teachers a nice package. You have to worry about what you implement, if it's okay with the teacher's contract. They work for the school district. They work for the taxpayers. The people that pay your salary is who you work for. You need to focus on education, regardless of whether the kids go to college or not. I mean, I've heard kids that come from, we're a wealthy school district. My son wasn't considered wealthy. My son did excellent. And it had nothing to do with his income or his demographics. And I know a lot of the problem is parents. You have to be involved in your child's life. I was raised where my parent, I only had one at the time, was very involved in our life. We were told we had to graduate high school. It wasn't an option. We had to because my father didn't have the opportunity. He had to leave school during the Depression. So I was told I had to graduate high school by hook or crook. And I graduated from the old Norristown High School, which right now, at this point in my life, I'm very proud. I got a very good education. Very good.
You need to wrap it up.
And my children all were told they had to graduate from college. Unfortunately, my youngest can't. We can't afford it. But you need to rein in your spending, rein in your borrowing, and sit down and start looking at your budget and start making cuts. It'll hurt. Of course, it'll hurt, but you're going to have to do it. Instead of coming back to the taxpayers who can't shoulder this anymore. You got a credit card that you use, the balance comes due, we can't pay your balance.
Thank you. Additional courtesy of the floor?
Excuse me, Joe Bickelman from Audubon. I just want to commend the board for saving some money on the transportation manager. going from a supervisor to a manager. So you looked at the job descriptions and saw that it's a less of a responsibility. So I was really happy to see that you're going to save maybe $50,000. That's really good. I want to just express my dissatisfaction with the restructuring of the debt, and to spend $2 million to make ends meet today. I don't think that's the way to go. It just doesn't make good sense there. I mean, you're going to spend another $2 million just to meet operational expenditures in the years to come. And I'm sure that wouldn't help the credit rating when Mr. Whiteleather gets on the phone with Moody's and says the reason that we're borrowing is because we can't pay our bills next year. So that's just something I feel strongly about. All right.
Thank you. Additional courtesy of the floor? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn? Brenda, second. Kathleen, all in favor? We are adjourned.